Hello, and welcome back to Felony Spectator. I am your host, Heather. On today's episode, we're discussing the case of Heather Mack, who was convicted of murdering her mother while on vacation in Bali. She did this with the help of her then boyfriend. You may have heard of this case because it has been in the news a lot recently, but being that I share the same name as the murderer, I couldn't help but look further into this case. Let's get right into it. Heather Mack was born in 1995 to Sheila Von Weiss Mack and the famous jazz musician James L. Mack. Not only was James a famous jazz artist and producer, he also served for more than 30 years as chairman of the music department at Harold Washington College. Sheila was also cultured and appreciated the arts and music. Her friends would describe her as a lovely person with a big heart and loved her family. Heather went to Oak Park and River Forest High School, and people knew her for her dancing mostly, and she was also considered very cultured because of the traveling she did with her parents. They would regularly take lavish vacations all over the world. Back in 2001, the Macks went on a Royal Caribbean cruise where James suffered a foot injury. The ship's doctor did his best to help James, but unfortunately the treatment wasn't effective and James would suffer a partial paralysis. James filed a lawsuit against Royal Caribbean, but it would take almost 9 years for the settlement to complete. Sadly, James had already passed away in 2006 during a vacation in Greece. James died in the hospital from a pulmonary embolism. So because James had died, the settlement was awarded to his wife, Sheila, for $340,667 and then $500,000 to the estate of James Mack. So a total of over $840,000 was paid out. Coincidentally, James had signed an updated will just 5 days before his death in 2006, leaving his entire estate to his daughter, Heather, who was only 10 years old at the time. So the $500,000 that should have gone to the estate instead was given to Sheila by a judge in Cook County, Illinois. When Heather got older and realized that part of her father's estate went to her mother's, this really upset Heather, and she began to think that her mother misled the courts to get the money. It was reported that Sheila had put Heather as her beneficiary if anything were to happen to her, which equaled to around $1.6 million, and also named her brother as executor. Now, Heather and her mom had a complicated relationship, and by complicated, I mean they didn't really get along at all. And this wasn't normal teenage angst because the police were called to the home over 86 times between 2004 to 2014. So that works out to just over 8 to 9 times a year over the course of 10 years. The neighbors would say the police were always being called to their house, and they were all aware of the relationship and how volatile and abusive it was. All of these calls were of Heather and Sheila fighting. Some of the things that took place were in 2010, Heather punched her mom's broken ankle out of anger. In 2011, Heather broke her mother's arm and then removed the phone cord to stop Sheila from calling police. Another time in 2011, Heather threatened her mother. Then in 2012, Heather bit her mother. So Heather had some pretty severe anger issues. Even though Heather was hard to deal with, her mother loved her and never gave up on her. Sheila's own sister was worried about their relationship and often told Sheila to kick her out and not to put up with Heather's behavior. But Sheila thought she had things under control. Heather could be really sweet and kind, but when she was angry, she turned into a monster. Oftentimes, Heather would disappear for days, and friends would tell Sheila to just let her go and stop giving her chance after chance. Heather was hanging out with a bad crowd, and it wasn't fair to Sheila, but she always took Heather back. Sheila once sent her good friend Elliot an email saying that she was having bad chest pains and felt isolated and trapped living with Heather's lies. She would say Heather was almost never home and was using her as a crash pad to sleep and wash clothes. She had made an appointment with a psychiatrist for herself and Heather to try and get Heather on some type of medication for her madness. In another letter Sheila wrote to a friend, she says that Heather had not gone to school in over a month and that Sheila was consumed with keeping her safe and trying to get her homebound tutoring. Sheila was also really stressed out because back in 2008, when the housing market crashed, Sheila's investments took a huge hit. So she sold their home in Oak Park, Chicago, and would buy into a high-rise condo in the city. After the move, Heather did go to college for a little while, but she would start dating a boy named Tommy Schaefer. Tommy was an unemployed rapper known as Tommy X, with 2 X's, who was born in 1993. According to Tommy's website, he was raised by his African-American mother and his white father had left him at birth. He writes that he attended Northern Illinois University with a full ride, but after 1 year, he dropped out to focus on hip-hop. Sheila did not approve of Tommy. People would say that Tommy often lied or made up stories for attention. One friend remembered that Tommy told people he had a heart condition and was going to die. He could also be emotionally abusive. His ex-girlfriend would say that he would get overly emotional over things and act like he was just desperate for love. Not long after Tommy and Heather started dating, Heather would drop out of school and move out of the home into a hotel. Here she spent most of her time with Tommy, as well as hanging out with the bad crowd. Sheila didn't always know where Heather went, and she ran away, basically. In an email dated February 6, 2014, Sheila would be telling Heather how sorry she was and that she wanted to hug her and protect her, and Sheila would beg for Heather to return home and that she was sick with worry. When she did finally track her down, Sheila would tell a friend that she barely recognized Heather. Then, on July 23rd, Sheila called the police because she had unauthorized purchases on her credit card at the Conrad Hotel in Chicago. Police would go to the hotel, and it was, of course, Heather and Tommy who booked a room and spent money on room service. Tommy would be arrested with a misdemeanor because he was apparently being unruly when the police arrived. On the way to the police station, Tommy would post a short video to social media of him in the back of the police car with the caption, "Pig stop." No charges were given to Heather. During Heather's relationship with Tommy, she would get pregnant. Sheila would take Heather to the doctor to get blood work done to confirm the pregnancy, and also try to obtain power of attorney over Heather to try and make her get an abortion if the blood work came back positive. It said that Sheila had forced Heather to have 2 previous abortions, and I wasn't able to confirm if those pregnancies were all with Tommy. In the meantime, Sheila would cash in some Starwood travel points and book a vacation to Bali for her and Heather. She thought that maybe they could start to mend their broken relationship and do one of their vacations together that they used to enjoy in the past. Some of Sheila's friends had asked her to cancel and not go away with Heather this time. I mean, all they did was fight. Heather was so rebellious and often violent, but Sheila would tell her friends that she loved Heather, and this vacation could bring them closer together. So on August 2nd, 2014, Heather and Sheila would arrive at St. Regis Hotel in Nusa Dua, Bali. They had flown first class, and this hotel is a 5-star luxury resort. I looked it up on TripAdvisor, and it's quite nice. In today's dollars, it would be about $1,000 a night Canadian. Heather would post a photo on social media of the view outside the hotel with a caption saying, quote, "I refuse to let someone say what I can do. Getting sick money, my attitude, you know what it do. Hashtag Bali," end quote. Sometime during the beginning of their holiday, Sheila got a little tipsy and had fallen down, hurting herself. So she would take painkillers and go to sleep. And while Sheila was passed out from her painkillers, Heather stole her mother's credit card again and booked a flight for Tommy to come to Bali, first class, of course. According to Tommy, he wanted to come to Bali to talk to Sheila about Heather's pregnancy. And I don't know why he couldn't wait until they got home, but that was also proven to be a lie. Before he left, back at home, Tommy would write on his social media, "Leaving August 4th for Indonesia. Might not come back," end quote. When Sheila realized that Tommy was in Bali, she was not happy. It said on the night of August 7th, 2014, Sheila and Tommy were seen in the lobby having an argument. It was overheard that Sheila was wanting Heather and Tommy to pick up the hotel bill. I can only assume it was the hotel bill for Tommy's room and flight that was stolen. Sometime later in the hotel room, Tommy would hit Sheila on the head, killing her with a decorative fruit bowl. Tommy and Heather would then stuff Sheila's body into a suitcase. At 11:26 a.m., they'd wheel her down to the lobby and the couple would call for a cab. Tommy tried to put the suitcase in the trunk of the cab, telling the driver that they would return after checking out. Heather would go to the front desk and check out without paying and said that her mother would pay when she checked out later on. They also asked to be allowed into the safe where their passports were, but were denied. Heather would later say that the cab driver seemed suspicious, thinking there might be drugs in the suitcase, so the two snuck out the back of the hotel, asking a different cab to take them to the airport. At the airport, they tried to ask immigration for new passports, but were denied again, so they went back into town and checked into a different hotel. After about 2 hours, the taxi driver who was waiting for the couple spoke to employees saying that nobody came back for the suitcase. The employee would go into the hotel room to see if he could find the couple, but found it empty instead. The taxi driver would then open the trunk and notice blood all over the outside of the suitcase, as well as blood on a sheet that was draped over it. The hotel encouraged the cab driver to take it to the police, so he did. And police opened the suitcase and they would find Sheila's half-naked body stuffed inside. Around 9 p.m. that same day, police would arrest Heather and Tommy at a different hotel just about 6 miles down from the St. Regis. The couple had told police that they had escaped a robbery and the robbers must have killed Sheila. Heather tried to talk her way out of going to jail and told the authorities she was pregnant. So she was forced to take a pregnancy test in prison, and it did confirm that she was in fact pregnant. But instead of sending her back to the US, they kept her in Indonesia where she would be charged with the murder of her mother. Tommy would admit to killing Sheila, smashing her head with this metal fruit bowl, and Heather admitted to helping her boyfriend stuff Sheila into this suitcase. Tommy would say that it was out of self-defense. According to him, Sheila threatened to kill their unborn baby and choked him for about 30 seconds before he hit her with this blunt object. Forensics would agree that Sheila was killed by a blunt object, concentrating on her face and head. She also had signs of a struggle as there was bruises down her arms and some of her fingers were even broken. Heather and Tommy were both charged with premeditated murder, which in Bali is punishable to death by firing squad. When photographed outside the police station, Tommy tried to conceal his face, but Heather would stand around smiling and smoking a cigarette, not looking concerned at all for her future. Lucky for Heather, instead of death, the judge gave her 10 years in prison and Tommy 18 years in prison. Later, on September 23, 2015, Tommy's cousin Robert Bibbs was arrested in Chicago for conspiring to kill Sheila with Tommy and Heather. Robert was advising Tommy about how to kill Sheila and what to do. Robert was given 9 years in prison in a plea deal that had Robert admit that Heather was going to pay him $50,000 from the inheritance for his assistance in planning the murder. Part of Sheila's will was to leave Heather $1.6 million, paid to her in smaller annual payments until she was 30, and then pay the remaining balance after her birthday. But Sheila's brother, who was executor, refused, citing the Illinois Slayer statute, which states if you're involved in a murder as a beneficiary of the person murdered, you lose all rights as a beneficiary. Heather would hire lawyers to try and fight that, but she was also given $150,000 for court costs and for food and personal expenses while behind bars. It was also later found out that her lawyer requested an additional $200,000 lump sum. Sheila's brother thought that this was to pay for bribes while she was in jail to be treated well, which did happen. Heather was able to have her baby in prison and keep that baby for 2 years, use a cell phone, and access social media as well. Her social media would be scrutinized because Heather was showing having fun. She would be dancing, she was wearing regular clothing, and joking around in the comment section of Instagram. She didn't look at all like she was suffering in prison. While Heather was in prison, she would speak out and say that her mother was overbearing and too controlling, further saying that Sheila made her sleep in the same bed as her after her father passed away. She mentions that her mom spoilt her with gifts, but her mom didn't really know how to show her love. They would sometimes bond over shoplifting, and a family friend told People that they once stole thousands of dollars worth of French cosmetics. Heather would also say that her mother would send her photos of her trying to kill herself and try and get her to move home, claiming she'd never see her mother again if she didn't come back. So life with her mom was just too much. Heather filed a lawsuit against her mother's estate to try and get back the inheritance she thinks she deserves from her father's death. Heather would also tell media that she loved her mother and still does, and her mother wasn't evil and didn't deserve to die. She claims it wasn't for money, but rather for freedom for her and her then unborn daughter. Once Heather's daughter turned 2, she had to give her up to someone else to help raise her, as she was no longer allowed to keep her in jail. So they had a little birthday party for Stella in jail before Heather had to turn her over. Stella stayed with an Australian Balinese woman who acted as a foster parent for Stella. 5 years later, after only serving 7 years, on October 29th, 2021, Heather was released from Indonesian prison. Originally, Heather said she wanted to stay in Indonesia with her daughter because she felt like life was safer there. But instead of staying in Indonesia, she was deported and is banned from the country for life. Heather said all she wanted to do was enjoy a normal life. So Heather and her daughter Stella would return back to Chicago, but unfortunately for her, as soon as she returned to the United States, she was promptly taken into custody by U.S. law enforcement. She would be charged for conspiracy to kill in a foreign country and obstruction of charges. Heather has pled not guilty, with her new lawyer saying the evidence is weak. He feels like this is a witch hunt and goes on to say that the U.S. could have extradited Heather back in 2015, but they chose not to. So instead, she did her time in another country. However, there is dozens of text messages discussing the murder, referring to themselves as Bonnie and Clyde, planning this while still in the U.S. They also discussed paying Tommy's cousin $50,000 to help plan the murder. Heather went through about 5 lawyers while incarcerated because she seems to clash with most of them. So it seems like she's still acting spoiled, so it'll be interesting to see how her new charges pan out. She is to appear in court in April, as her lawyer is still reviewing the pre-trial discovery provided by the government. My thoughts? Heather Mack is giving us Heathers a bad name. In all seriousness, she sounds like an entitled, spoiled brat who doesn't like to follow rules or being told what to do. She dropped out of school, stole money from her mom, was violent towards her mom for years. Even if Sheila was an overbearing mother, that doesn't give Heather the right to kill her. Move out and move on with your life if you don't like it. She might be sorry now, and she might claim that she loved her mother, but I think Heather's just manipulative and just trying to play the victim. I will have to keep you updated on this case because it's definitely not over. That's it for today. Thanks again for joining me here at Felony Spectator, and we'll see you soon.